Argentina, a country with economic conditions that were once successful and prosperous, but in a short time fell into a slump and experienced a prolonged economic crisis. When talking about Argentina, majority of people will associate this country with its football, which indeed has extraordinary achievements. In addition to scoring many world-class players, Argentina had also won the World Cup 3 times, most recently in 2022, and is currently placed as #1 in the FIFA rankings. But do you know, behind the myriad achievements of its football players, Lionel Messi's home country has long experienced a prolonged economic crisis for decades. Just imagine, as many as 57% of their people living below the poverty line. The currency is very weak and experiences hyperinflation up to hundreds of percent. This means the country's currency continues to lose its purchasing power, and the price of all staples continues to rise day by day. Only 20% of Argentina's workforce has permanent jobs and a decent quality of life. Throughout history, Argentina has experienced 9 bankruptcies due to debt defaults. Although it has changed leaders and policies many times, the economy in Argentina has never been able to recover and is even more devastating from year to year. Ironically, at the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina was actually once considered one of the fastest growing economies in America. Argentina is a very huge country. Its position is also quite strategic. It has abundant natural resources, and its population is also quite large. In the early 1900s, Argentina's agriculture and livestock industry had developed rapidly and produced exports of extraordinary value. With its natural resources, Argentina was an attraction for major European investors to develop industries in this region. That's why Argentina has been flooded with immigrants from Europe, until the population has increased 4-fold in 4 decades. During the First World War, Argentina also had the advantage of being a neutral country that exported various food commodities to both sides, whose farmlands were destroyed by the war. Because of these factors, Argentina's economy was among the top 10 most prosperous countries in the world. It beat France, Italy, and even Germany, and its per capita income even beat that of the United States. Thus, it's no wonder that many economists thought that Argentina had the potential to become a superpower that could compete with other big countries. But what happened was the opposite. The glory of Argentina that everyone imagined never took place. Instead, Argentina fell into a very deep economic abyss, and the majority of its people were trapped in poverty. To this day, Argentina is considered to be the only developed and prosperous country that has fallen into poverty and stuck in this state. Because of this unique phenomenon, economists have given Argentina its own nickname, the Argentina paradox. Then, what are the causes and sources of all these problems? From various sources that I found, Argentina's decline was not caused just by a single event, but by a series of interrelated conditions. Since the end of the First World War in 1918, as I mentioned earlier, Argentina was flooded with investment flow from Europe in the early 20th century. But since the war, the flow of investment to Argentina has dropped drastically. At that time, Argentina's domestic industry also experienced challenges because the price of imported raw materials rose drastically due to the war in Europe, which created a shortage of supplies. After the war ended, it was Argentina's exports that plummeted as European countries were able to produce their own food and focused on building their war-ravaged countries. Not long after that, there was a global Great Depression in 1928, which again made Argentina's export commodities even more sluggish because the whole world lost its purchasing power. All this international turmoil finally made Argentina realize that all the factors of its country's prosperity were very fragile because it relied too much on international trade and investment from foreign countries. As a result of this economic shock, the government of Argentina experienced a coup led by General of the Army, José Félix, in 1930. Since then, Argentina has been ruled by an authoritarian regime. After the coup, the new regime adopted a policy of protectionism, which sought to reduce Argentina's dependence on foreign countries by producing industrial goods domestically, and also pursued a policy of economic isolation by closing itself off to foreign investment in limiting imports. Since then, Argentina's economic approach has been anti-foreign and very much focused on its own domestic economy. For example, it increased tariffs and taxes on imported goods from 16.7% to 28.7% in 1933, an increase of almost 67% in 3 years. This was done under the pretext of protecting local products in domestic market competition. It is clear from this data that Argentina's openness to international trade has dropped drastically since the 1930s. On the other hand, state-owned companies in Argentina gained a lot of benefits from the government, from tax breaks, low-interest loans, to various land acquisitions and so on. Since then, any imported goods in circulation are considered to be destroying the market for local products. Initially, this seemed to be a positive thing to get rid of the dependence on foreign countries and to make Argentina economically independent. But in fact, all of this led to disaster for the economy of Argentina. Why is that? First of all, with this policy, technological development in Argentina has stagnated and was far behind foreign countries. As a result, with a large population, the country's production capacity could not meet the increasing needs of the people. And in the end, it created a shortage of supply, the price of goods rose and caused very high inflation. On the other hand, state-owned companies in Argentina operated inattentively because they were spoiled by various subsidies and support from the government. As there was no competition, state-owned companies also lacked the motivation to improve the quality and quantity of their products to meet market standards. As a result, state-owned companies became a burden on the state, which constantly requested capital injections, loans, subsidies, land acquisitions, tax breaks, and more. With falling export revenues due to isolationist politics and undeveloped private industry because it was too controlled by state-owned enterprises, plus the government could not rely on taxes from the public. Finally, the government of Argentina was forced to take the only solution to replenish the state coffers, which was to go into debt to other countries. Debt to other countries means debt using foreign currency. And with the peso currency experiencing continuous inflation, Argentina's national debt swelled due to the low peso exchange rate. As a result, in 1952, Argentina's national debt increased 17 times in just 6 years. This condition caused such a hit towards Argentina, plus when many other countries began to rise after World War II, Argentina was even worse off due to the isolation policy, which actually backfired. Finally, in 1975, Argentina began to open up to international trade. Foreign investment began to enter, as well as foreign products, which started to fill the market competition in this country. However, because of the long period of isolation, Argentina's state-owned companies, which had been the backbone of the economy, became overwhelmed and could not compete with products from abroad. As a result, Argentina's economy became even more sluggish, and their per capita income fell by 20% in 1990. With this kind of economic condition, it is not surprising that Argentina's political condition was also turbulent, with politicians voicing criticism and at the same time giving sweet promises regarding economic improvements if they're elected as president. As a result, Argentina changed its presidents many times and was ruled by politicians who gave various sweet promises that were populist in nature. For example, from 1949 to 1955, President Perón opened twice as many vacancies for civil servants and state-owned enterprises employees. The government of Argentina also spent a lot of its state budget just to subsidize electricity to treat its citizens with cheap electricity rates. The problem was that these populist programs were not supported by healthy sources of funds, but from debt, confiscation of private assets or foreign companies, to excessive money printing that had triggered high inflation every year for decades. As the value of its currency continued to weaken, Argentina repeatedly experienced tremendous surge in debt. For example, in 1976 to 1983, Argentina's national debt increased almost 5 times, from $9.7 billion to $45 billion. Even until 2023, Argentina's debt reached $400 billion, which was equivalent to 80% of their country's GDP. This debt ratio was already very feeble for developing countries. With such a chaotic economic condition, Argentina has experienced bankruptcy 9 times due to debt defaults to other countries, where the biggest bankruptcy case occurred in 2001 with a default amount of $93 billion US. To this day, Argentina is the largest borrower from the IMF with more than $42 billion in debt. Politically, Argentina is just as chaotic. From 1930 to 1983, the government of Argentina has experienced 6 coups. On the other hand, from 1945 to the present, the government has also changed its leadership 33 times. Can you imagine what the political conditions would be like if a country changed its leaders every 2 to 3 years? Actually, it is fine to change regime as many times as possible, but the problem is that the change of regime in Argentina is always followed by drastic policy changes. Therefore, every time there was a long-term program in the previous regime, the program was always stopped and replaced with a new policy. And worse, to finance the new programs, the government of Argentina often adds new debt, which causes the old programs funded by debt to also become neglected. As a result, the development that has been achieved previously was wasted, and Argentina often had to return to point zero after a regime change, even though the debt from the previous regime continued to accumulate. It was also not uncommon for foreign companies to be forcibly confiscated by regime change governments. The funny thing is that after a regime change, some state-owned companies often also change their status to private companies. And if a regime change occurred, the companies that have transitioned to public companies often also return their status as state-owned companies. This phenomenon created a recurring cycle of political and economic instability. This instability has left Argentina trapped in a prolonged crisis that has lasted almost a century. With this kind of condition in the country, it certainly scares many investors from investing in Argentina. No company wants to enter a country where the government can confiscate their assets at any time. That's the ironic story of Argentina's economy. A country that was originally considered a land of dreams because of its natural resources has now turned into a country that is almost hopeless. From this story, we can learn that regardless of the country's condition, its success still depends on the wisdom of its leaders.